We all like to think of ourselves as rational and logical people, but the truth is, we are susceptible to all sorts of cognitive biases and errors that can lead us astray, both in our professional lives and in our personal lives. Here are 10 of the most common cognitive errors we make without realizing it and how we can avoid them. Number 1 is the sunk cost fallacy. We often think that if we have invested so much time, money, and effort into something, we can't possibly give up on it now. When you ask such people why they are still holding on to a relationship that isn't working, they tell you they've invested so much to back out. But just because you put a lot of effort into something doesn't mean you have to keep going down the same path. If it's not working, it's okay to cut your losses and move on. To avoid the sunk cost fallacy, it's important to be aware of it and to try to think objectively about the situation at hand. Try to consider all the relevant information, including opportunity cost, before making a decision. Number 2 is the confirmation bias. This is a tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. Whether you go through life believing that people are inherently good or people are inherently bad, you will find daily proof to support your case. To avoid the confirmation bias, it's important to be open-minded and to consider all the evidence before making a decision, rather than just looking for information that supports what we already think. Number 3 is the halo effect. This is when we let our overall impression of someone color our perception of their individual qualities. For example, if we think someone is attractive, we might also think they are more intelligent or successful than they actually are. To avoid the halo effect, try not to let your first impression of people cloud your judgment too much. Number 4 is the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is a tendency to attribute our successes to our own personal qualities and attributing our failures to external factors. In intimate relationships, the self-serving bias can destroy your union if you take it too far. It's common for partners to overestimate their contribution to a relationship. Rarely do anyone admit that their partner's equal contribution is the reason a relationship is healthy. This can make one underappreciate their partner, which can lead to emotional problems in a relationship. To avoid the self-serving bias, it's important to be humble and to realize that we are always responsible for our successes and our failures. Sometimes, things just happen to be beyond our control. Number 5 is groupthink. This is a tendency for people to conform to the beliefs of their social group, even if those beliefs are illogical. This bias can lead to bad decisions because people are not thinking critically about the issue at hand. One famous example of groupthink was United States' decision to launch an attack against Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in 1961, which proved unsuccessful. With the Bay of Pigs invasion, President Kennedy made a decision and the people around him supported it, despite their own concerns. To avoid groupthink, it's important to be aware of it and to encourage dissenting opinions. Try to create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their own views, even if they differ from the majority. Number 6 is the anchoring bias. This bias can occur when we place too much importance on the first piece of information we receive. This can lead us to make irrational decisions based on the initial data point, rather than considering all the relevant information. For example, if you first see a t-shirt that costs $1,200, then see a second one that costs $100, you are prone to see the second t-shirt as cheap. To avoid anchoring bias, it's important to be aware of it and to question your initial reaction to new information. Try to consider all the evidence before making a decision. Number 7 is the illusion of control. This is the belief that we have more control over events than we actually do. We often think we can influence outcomes that are actually out of our hands. For example, most people in casinos throw the dice as hard as they can if they need a high number and as carefully as they can if they need a low number. which is as meaningless as a football fan thinking they can swing a game by gesturing in front of a TV. To avoid the illusion of control, it's important to realize that there are many things in life that we cannot control, and that we have to accept the things that we cannot change. Number 8 is the recency bias. This is a tendency to give too much weight to recent information and events. For example, if there has been a market crash, investors would expect it to continue. This can refrain them from investing and deviating from their financial goals. To avoid the recency bias, it's important to be aware of it and to try to think long-term when making decisions. Try to consider all the relevant information, even if some of it is from distant past, before making a decision. Number 9 is the survivorship bias. This is a tendency to focus on things that have survived or been successful while ignoring the things that have failed or been unsuccessful. The media is largely to blame for the survivorship bias since it primarily reports on the triumphs of the fortunate and not the less fortunate. For example, we see and hear on many media platforms how Bill Gates dropped out of college and went on to become a billionaire. So did Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. However, the media fails to report on the countless others who dropped out of college but did not make it big. To avoid the survivorship bias, you'd have to conduct your own digging by regularly visiting the graves of one's promising ideas, investments, and careers that have been buried out of the sight of the media or the media has purposefully ignored. It's a sad walk, but it's one that should give you some perspective. Number 10 is stereotyping. This is a tendency to judge people based on our preconception about them rather than their individual merits. This bias can lead us to make poor decisions because we're not considering all the relevant information. To avoid stereotyping, it's important to be aware of it and to try to think objectively about people. Try to consider all the relevant information, even if some of it does not fit with your preconception before making a decision. These are just a few of the cognitive biases and errors that we all make on a daily basis. Be aware of them so you can avoid falling victim to them. Do you know of any cognitive biases or errors? Share them in the comments, and as always, hit the subscribe button for more such content. Thank you for listening. See you later.